In the early morning of the 24th of February, 2022, Russian President Vladimir Putin would declare the start of a special military operation in Ukraine. To the rest of the world, this was an invasion. Russian forces crossed the border in the northeast and south of the country. The most significant Russian push came from Belarus to the north of Ukraine's capital city, Kyiv. Their objective was to capture the city and install a puppet government to prevent any organized resistance from the rest of the country, in effect ending the war before it could truly start. While the city of Kyiv was far from any Russian ground forces, there was an industrial airport just 10 kilometers away from the city, in the town of Hostomel, and the Russian command had set its sights on this airport. Their plan was to use around 20 Mi-8 helicopters, along with around 20 Ka-52 attack helicopters, to deploy 700 airborne troops from the VDV to capture the airport. Once the airport was secured, Il-76 transport planes would be used to deploy thousands of troops and hundreds of vehicles to Kyiv's doorstep. The only Ukrainian forces in the area was a small National Guard base attached to the airport, garrisoned by 200 conscripts who had never seen combat, which the Russian command assumed would put up little to no resistance, and this would prove to be a costly assumption.
Раз, два, три, четыре, пять, шесть, семь, восемь, девять, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Есть! Есть, блядь! Два! Сбили, сука!
As the Russian helicopters crossed the Dnipro River, several were shot down, shattering any hope of little to no resistance. The defenders had spread out into the woods surrounding the airport, armed with old Soviet manpads, small arms, and 2 anti-aircraft guns. The Battle for Hostomel Airport had begun. The Russian forces used rocket and autocannon fire from the attack helicopters in an attempt to suppress the defenders. But since the Ukrainians had already spread out, the Russian attacks were ineffective. The Ukrainian defenders shot down several Russian helicopters as they attacked the airport, but the most critical aspect of the defense was they delayed the Russian landing operations for several hours, preventing any Russian ground troops from entering the airport and beginning to secure it. Once the Ukrainians began to run out of ammunition for their manpads, the Russians were able to begin landing troops at the airport. The Russian forces immediately spread out to secure the airport, while the Ukrainian defenders began to fall back to the administrative buildings and their base to consolidate their defense. Additionally, hastily formed civilian militias approached the airport and engaged Russian troops. The Russians took time to organize their assault, giving the Ukrainians time to dig in their defense. While the Ukrainians put up a valiant defense, delaying the Russian operation by hours, once the ground assault started, they were quickly forced to retreat due to low supplies and overwhelming numbers. Once the Ukrainians retreated, the Russian forces secured the airport and began preparing it to receive transport aircraft. Additional airborne troops were deployed to assist in securing the airport after the defenders had retreated. while the Russians secured the airport, they were delayed by hours and were running low on equipment. This delay gave the Ukrainian army time to mobilize and reach the airport to reinforce the National Guard, and this new Ukrainian force was heavily armed and quickly encircled the airport. The Ukrainians launched a swift counterattack, which the Russian forces had no hope of repelling. The surviving Russian forces surrendered, giving control of the airport back to Ukraine, and preventing Russia's plan of deploying thousands of troops to Kyiv, likely saving the city from falling to Russia. While the Ukrainians prevented the Russian plan and retook the airport, the Russian ground forces from Belarus were still advancing toward Kyiv, and later that day the airport would fall under attack again. Both sides would fight over it for 12 days, but Ukraine would eventually lose it to Russia, but not before sabotaging it so it could not be used. Thank you for watching the first mini documentary here on History Blitz. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, and share. And if you have any suggestions for future videos, please leave it in the comments and I'll be sure to check it out. Thank you again.